This game shows why Jose Raul Capablanca would be a dominant force in chess even today. I mean, when we talk about great players of the past trying to compete in today's chess environment, we're usually talking about opening innovations and their ability to understand them and keep up with them with computer technology. Well, this game, one of the most amazing games in chess history, shows how well Capablanca could handle such a situation. His opponent was the strong player, American Grandmaster Frank Marshall. And Frank Marshall had been working on an opening for 2 years in his chess laboratory, working on it, studying it, preparing it, picking the right moment to spring it onto the chess world. And his opponent that he decided to spring this opening, he'd been preparing for 2 years, was Jose Raul Capablanca. The name of the opening is the Marshall attack. And it is this very day, arguably, the greatest defensive system against e4. It is so potent that almost all top grandmasters find a way to avoid it if they can. So let's jump in and see this amazing game between Capablanca and Frank Marshall, played in 1918 in New York City. Capablanca has white, Marshall has black. Capablanca begins with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. The Spanish or Ruy Lopez opening. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop to e7. These are all the main moves, of course, of the main line. Bishop b3, castles, and c3. And the idea of c3 is to allow this bishop to tuck away at c2 and to play d4. And that's a key concept in this Marshall attack. If white wants to avoid the Marshall, the most common anti-Marshall is to play a4 here, but there are actually quite a few anti-Marshall lines. But c3 was played, and the most common move, the main line, is d6. And this leads to a number of different formations for black. But Marshall, noticing that this pawn on c3 took away the natural development square from the knight at b1 and weakened key light squares in the position, played the move d5, marching forward and willing to gambit a pawn for the compensation. Capablanca had never seen this before. No one really had. So he went ahead and took the material. First you take on d5, knight takes, then you take twice on e5. And the modern way the Marshall attack is played is usually c6. Although there are still players that will play it the way Marshall did. He played the move knight to f6. The idea is that this knight can later jump to g4. Maybe the bishop could even go to b7 and create some pressure down the long diagonal as well. Now, Capablanca knew he was in his opponent's opening preparation. I think he kind of smelled a rat. The most obvious move here is to just go ahead and play d4. But then after bishop d6, rook e1, knight to g4 coming, he could see that his king would be under some pressure. It turns out the game transposes to that anyway. What Capablanca does, he just plays the rook back. You know, he doesn't want to play the exact moves he knows that Marshall has studied and prepared for. Marshall plays bishop to d6, of course, aiming at Capablanca's king, ideas of knight to g4, queen to h4, and white's king looks very, very unsafe here. And truth be told, it is. So to keep the knight out of the g4 square, Capablanca plays the move h3. And Marshall had anticipated this in his home prep, and he played this powerful idea, knight to g4. Whoa, isn't he just losing? He's giving up his knight, right? Well, it would be a big mistake to take that knight because of queen to h4 with all sorts of nasty threats. One potential line is queen to f3, then bishop h2 check. The king cannot go to h1. Be kind of nasty that way. The king f1, but then bishop takes g4, hitting the queen and covering the flight square at e2. If white were to try to counterpin the bishop with rook to e4, then this nice move, just bishop comes back to f4. If the queen takes, it's mate on h1 because the bishop controls e2. And if the rook takes, queen h1, king e2, and then you just take the queen, the rook comes over and checks, and that's it. So this knight on g4 can't be touched. Capablanca, calculating that, I assume, maybe he was using intuition, avoids that and plays the queen to f3, puts the queen in a defensive position. Also, he does attack the a8 rook, although there's no time to take it right now. Marshall doesn't worry about the rook. He just plays the queen to h4, continuing to pile on the pressure. If Capablanca takes the knight now, you get the same variation we just saw. So d4 is played by Capablanca. Get a stake in the center and make it possible for this bishop at c1 to develop. Now, the next move Marshall played was knight takes f2. And everybody at the time thought that this was really the only move. I mean, obviously, black has given up material and has to just keep pressing with the attack. But modern players know that h5 is actually a decent move for black. Sort of keeps him in the game. But bishop e3, and there's a complex position. If you take the knight, you get the same kind of problems that we've already seen before. White's pretty much just lost there. But knight to f2 was played by Marshall, and Capablanca basically plays the perfect reply. Rook to e2. If he takes with the queen, then bishop h2 check. The king has to stay in contact with the queen. Then bishop g3. And after queen to e2, bishop h3, gh3, rook a to e8. White is in some trouble. But even here, actually, computers show a way to save the game with queen to d2, allowing the rook access to e3. And you just take and then rook to e3, and white would actually be winning in that position. But rook to e2 is definitely makes a lot more sense. The best try is probably to just go ahead and sacrifice. But bishop g4 is played by Frank Marshall, skewering the queen and the rook. If he takes the knight, then after bishop g3, queen f1, taking twice on e2, and we can see white's king is in huge trouble in this position. So instead, he takes the bishop at g4. Now bishop h2 check, king to f1. If black plays the knight to h1, it looks dangerous because of the threat of knight to g3 check, forcing the king to e1 with these discoveries, but actually it doesn't matter. Knight d2, knight g3 check, king to e1, and despite the possible discoveries, black does not have anything in this position. This moves over, and he is fine. So the best move, and the one Frank Marshall played, is bishop to g3. And now rook takes f2, gives up a rook for two minor pieces is the thought. And if he does that, white's just going to be winning. So he has to keep the fire burning. He has to keep the attack going. So Marshall plays queen to h1 check, king to e2. Now if queen takes bishop at c1, Capablanca can take on g3, and after queen to b2 check, it looks like Marshall is really beginning to get a lot of material here. And he is, but the problem is after knight d2, queen a1, after queen takes a1, Capablanca could solve his problems with the move rook takes f7. And if the king goes to h8, you just take, and after this, these two minor pieces, plus this central pawn, leaves white with a winning position. And if instead he takes on f7 with the rook, then bishop f7 check, king takes f7, and then queen to f3 check is a double attack on the king and the rook. So instead, Marshall goes ahead and takes on f2 with his bishop. King takes f2, that would be a mistake. After queen to c1, it looks like black would have at least equalized the position. So instead, Capablanca plays this brilliant move. I think this is a move that many top GMs today might miss, and that's the move bishop to d2. Literally just creating all kinds of ways for his king to escape and keeping the queen out of c1, defending the bishop. Really nice move. Bishop to h4. Now queen to h3 from Capablanca. Attacking the bishop and offering the exchange of queens at the same time. Obviously, Marshall can't accept the exchange of queens or his attack is over and he would lose. Rook a to e8 check, king to d3. Now queen to f1 check, trying to keep the fire burning. King to c2. So has Capablanca's king found its safety? It looks like it may have. The bishop goes to f2. Obviously, he needs to save it. But now queen to f3 from Capablanca pins the bishop to the queen. So if rook to e2 were played, which makes some sense, increasing the pressure, then Capablanca could play a4, preparing to activate the rook along the a file. If queen to e1 from Marshall, the threat is rook takes d2 check. The knight cannot retake because queen takes a1. That actually works anyway. You can just go ahead and take on b5, and then after rook d2 check, knight takes. He just allows black to take the rook, and after queen takes bishop a b5, knight f3, again, we see white has a clear advantage with the two minor pieces and better pawn structure. So what Frank Marshall does instead is he steps out of that pin the queen has against the bishop at f2. And here Capablanca plays another incredibly strong move. Bishop to d5. The idea is to give his king a place to breathe and to hide on g3. So Frank Marshall plays c5. Now he's going to try to open up lines on the queen side to get after the king. Pawn takes pawn, bishop takes c5. And again, another move that modern engines is their top choice, and Capablanca found it over and over again, b4. Kicking the bishop and giving his king a place to hide. Truly amazing chess. Bishop to d6, now rook to a4 to open up the a file for the rook and maybe relieve this pin on the knight at b1. And this is Frank Marshall's last-ditch effort to open up lines towards white's king. He plays the move a5. Again, just trying to open up as many lines as he possibly can to get at the king. Capablanca takes on b5, a b4. Now rook to a6, attacking the bishop at d6. Pawn takes c3, knight c3, and now bishop to b4. b6. Now Capablanca has a little something to play with. This past b pawn. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and just look at these beautiful bishops. The only thing black can claim here is that white's king is open, but Capablanca isn't too worried about that. What Marshall would like to do here is play rook to e3, attacking the queen and putting pressure on the bishop. The problem is white would win with a very nice tactic. Do you see it? That's right, queen to f7 check. And if rook takes, then rook to a8 check, and you can only block it once, and that's actually mate. This other rook cannot block because it's pinned by the bishop at d5. So Marshall plays the move h6 so there's no back rank, and now back rank mate threat, so he can play rook to e3 now. Capablanca unworried about that, goes ahead and plays b7. Marshall plays rook to e3 here, and then Capablanca plays this move, bishop to f7 check. And after all of these dangerous moments and this prepared opening from Frank Marshall, it is Frank Marshall who resigns in this position. Let's look and see why. If king to h7, then queen to f5 check, king to h8, and this nice concluding shot would come. Rook to h6 mate. The pawn can't take the rook because it's pinned by the bishop. If instead he just takes the bishop, then he promotes to a queen with check after king h7. He could just play rook takes h6 check, either check. If he takes with the pawn, then queen to h8 would lead a mate. And if king takes h6, queen to h8, king g5, queen h5 is mate. And of course, if he plays king to h8, then what we've already seen, this mating pattern, rook to h6. I have no doubt Capablanca would be able to navigate the opening innovations of modern players. Let me know if you think you would be able to do so in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.